Okay, good. So, good evening. So let's get to the big problem with the two creation stories. Like I said, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 and 3. Yeah, 1 to chapter 2, verse 4, and then from then on to the end of chapter 3. Um, so, so last time we established a kind of method um, that when we see the author doing something problematic, so again, the reigning approach to problematic parts of the Bible, certainly of the Torah, in biblical criticism, kind of academic biblical research, is that when you see something problematic, inconsistent, contradictory in the text, we have they explain it as a sign or as evidence that the biblical author or the biblical editor or the biblical editors are sloppy. Okay, that they missed something that we discovered. You know, they missed this inconsistency or this problem that we've just discovered. And the method that we discussed last time is that in our discussions, that's a certain discipline. We're going to treat it like high literature. Okay, we're going to take it seriously as a work, as a single work of literature, you know, a work of an author or even of an editor, but who put some thought into it and wasn't so sloppy. So what we're trying to do is to understand the method and the purpose of things that look problematic to us, which obviously introduces the glaring differences between the two creation stories. Okay? So Christian and Jewish theologians have, by the way, can you hear me okay?
Okay.
So for thousands of years, Jewish and Christian theologians have struggled to explain these contradictory stories. And so we're going to follow follow along that path to see the contradictions and try to explain them. So what are the contradictions? Your mission was to find the contradictions or inconsistencies. So what did you find?
All right. Can I clarify one thing?
Yes.
So, does it count as a contradiction if we're reading Genesis 2:4 through 3 as occurring after Genesis 1, or does it count as a contradiction as they're both starting from scratch?
Well, look, that is an explanation, okay? Because look, the two stories seem to be telling the same thing, okay? How
Okay.
God created. What you offered is an explanation, okay? So these stories don't line up. A possible explanation is that this happened first and this happened later, and that solves the contradiction. So that's a possible solution. But before we solve it, like what are the differences? And again, the differences are numerous. Is this what are the kind of glaring ones that jumped out at you?
So to start out, there's only dry ground and no water, whereas in the first story, it's all water and the dry ground is buried.
Mm-hmm.
Next, there's no vegetation, no water, and there's a water that comes up from beneath the earth and causes, I guess, some kind of mud or something. I don't know. But then from the dirt, man is made before any other living creature, including all the vegetation.
In the second one, yeah.
In the second one, yeah.
Right. So man comes first, whereas in the first chapter, man comes last.
Right.
Okay.
When man is made, apparently man is not made with a woman, whereas in the first story, man and woman were kind of made in the same verse.
Right.
And then after man is made, then the vegetation is brought forth by God. Eden is planted, man is placed in Eden. Then come the creatures of the earth, including both beasts and birds, but no creeping things, which is different than the first account. and there's no explanation for the seas or any of the sea creatures. Also, there is a description of rivers which wasn't in the first account.
That's a good catch. Usually people don't think of that, but you're right. River, geological descriptions, what kind of rocks, what special kind of precious stones, gold. In the second.
And then, yep, in the second, not in the first. And there's no description of initially man's dominion over animals, whereas in the first account there was they'll rule the terrestrial life. There's no description of the firmament of the skies being made or anything like that. I guess that goes towards the waters or anything like that.
Well, there's no, again, the act of creation starts with man and then everything else, but yeah.
And then there's no description of like light being created. There's no description of the vessels of light, that is the heavenly bodies. There's no description of the sun or the moon in the second account. And then in the description of man is not that he was made in God's image, but he was formed as opposed to created from the dust. And then in the second account, man ultimately at the end becomes like God, not because of an image, but because he attains, or they attain, knowledge like God by eating from the tree.
In the first, he's created in the image of God, and in the second, he obtains this divine characteristics of knowing good from bad. Okay.
And then also all of like Genesis, or all of chapter 3 seem to be very like almost that entire story seems to be outside the like different than the context in Genesis 1 through 2, 4.
And what do you mean context? I mean, you're right, but what?
Just the whole description of that they were naked, nothing, they felt no shame, nothing like that is ever mentioned. The psychology of the Adam creature is not mentioned in Genesis 1,
right, look,
whereas it's explored.
Right. In chapter 2, there's a transformation. They're a certain kind of beings and have a certain kind of experience, and then it's transformed. They become shame. They feel shame. They're punished. None of that is part of the first. Okay. So can you see the shared screen?
I can.
Yeah. So these are differences that, again, commentators have kind of collected. Yeah. Some of yours are more detailed about the skies, the water above and the water below, but these are kind of the big glaring differences, mostly stuff that you've already outlined. Again, created last, jointly. Okay, then, being created out of nothing and being formed out of something. Whether Adam and Eve move from one part of creation to another, whether they're evicted from where they were at the beginning or whether they're delivered here from the start, whether they're punished or not, the prohibition about eating.
When that's in the good, well, I guess in the first account, they weren't described as good after they were made, but after they were made, the entire host of everything that was made was described as very good, whereas in Genesis 2, it's not good for them to be alone. So they go from being good to being described as in a condition of not good.
Yeah, but it's not good for them to be. It's not that. It's
yeah,
not of it is good or bad. It's
the condition of being solitary is not good.
Yeah, it's unhealthy in not good in the sense of not good for him, not healthy. And again, obviously, since in chapter 2 they're not created together, then there's a problem of finding a mate for Adam. It is good, as you say. Okay, yeah, and then the one thing is the style. The first creation story is very majestic. very poetically, not sophisticated. I mean, it's maybe sophisticated too, but it reads like high poetry, okay, with rhythm and symmetry, whereas the second is like a laundry list. This happened, and this, and this, and this.
It starts from the dirt.
That's true. Actually, that's a good point. Starting from the heavens to. So, to me, and to the kind of commentators that I've been following over the years, the two creation stories are a good example of the shortcomings of the documentary hypothesis specifically, and biblical criticism in general, because the idea that these two creation stories reflect two different religious traditions that the editors placed side by side in this kind of religious canon. If this were true, why would the editor leave two contradictory stories in a religious book that purports to tell readers or audiences something true? Obviously, this is not a book of fairy tales for its intended audience. Okay. So again, if we accept that it's not a single author, even if we go with their method that later editors put this together, then even then, the editor clearly thought that there was some sort of worthwhile message to convey with this weird pairing at the very beginning of the book. So even if the documentary hypothesis is correct, it doesn't solve any problem for us. The only thing it does is it changes the question from what is the author trying to tell us to what is the editor trying to tell us. Instead of an author writing these two contradictory stories, it's an editor who took two existing sources but kept them together or put them together. Okay, unless we're to believe that the editor is completely sloppy and doesn't care whether readers find the book credible at all. So for the sake of argument, let's assume that we're dealing with a skilled author or skilled editor, just as we would if we were reading some award-winning book, work of fiction today, or an Oscar-winning movie. So if you read a book, or if you watched some fancy movie that came out today, and the movie started with this kind of double scene, this kind of double creation story, how would we explain it? Like, again, the movie starts setting up some sort of family, or a business, or the creation of some sort of society, and then when it's over, it goes to the beginning and tells you the same story but very differently. Okay, so what would we as viewers, readers of kind of a sophisticated work of literature, how could we explain it?
It seems we could explain it. The first story comes from chaos. Order comes from chaos, or a watery chaos. A lot of and the second story seems to come from things are fixed, and there's no movement at all, but everything's rigid.
Everything starts already in place.
Right. Everything. So it seems like it's telling, did things begin with chaos, or did things begin with things being fixed in place? There's two alternative ways of viewing the beginnings.
Okay, so these are two alternative realities, you would say. I mean, again, I'm not asking you to pin it down, but that's one explanation, that these are two parallel universes. In one universe, this society or this family starts off this way. In another, it starts in a completely different ways, and we're going to follow on two separate paths and see the different trajectories from this kind of beginning versus this kind of beginning. Okay? So that's one explanation. What other explanations could there be for, again, I'm not asking you to think of this story in particular, but just when you have, again, in a work of literature that you don't suspect is a hodgepodge, when you have two opposing stories, what are the possible solutions?
One's a dream and one's not.
Okay. Or
like one's not reality, one is reality.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So maybe one is reality, another is somebody's perception, or one is one person's perception, the other is another person's perception. Okay. It's kind of like a Quentin Tarantino thing where you see, like, you progress through the movie and then you go back to 3 scenes ago and you see it now through a different character's experience, and it looks different.
And there were like movies when there's a whole chunk of movie that just is somebody's imagination or dream,
right?
Something like that.
Yeah. But again, in terms of the dream, it's simply another person's or another kind of perception. That there's reality and this is, or yeah, in any case, it's a perception. It's a dream perception as opposed to reality perception. Okay. What else could it be?
I guess it could be continuation of the same story. I guess I was suggesting that earlier when I was saying one follows the other, but it doesn't quite seem to work.
Right. In this case, it doesn't work. I mean, if the author goes back to the beginning and inserts all these contradictions, it makes it hard to see one as a follow-up to the next. But another possible explanation is that the first scene is the general storyline. Okay, this happened. This is this family's story leading from the American Revolution up to the outbreak of the American Civil War. Okay, and then you go back and you tell the same story, but not the kind of the shell, the general kind of big picture story, but in greater detail, kind of filling in all sorts of details that you didn't see from, 1,000 feet up in the air, but on the ground level, to fill that shell with kind of more reality, kind of ground level, real stuff. And this is what I just said is has been the standard traditional explanation in Judaism and Christianity. Okay, that chapter 1 is the outline. It tells us that God created the plants, the animals, the earth, the sky, the lights in the sky, the heavenly bodies, etc., everything that you said, it says there. And then comes chapter 2 to fill in the details about how and when, etc., etc. Okay? The problem with that is kind of like what you said about the sequential explanation. It could make sense, but there are too many, some of the differences between the two creation stories, as you can see on the screen, are not just filling in more details, but it's a different or a contradictory story altogether. Okay, man is created last, or man is created first, before the plants and the animals. That's a big difference. That's not just details. God creates stuff out of nothing with his word, or God takes something and manufactures something out of it. Again, earth to create Adam, a rib to create Eve. Again, that's a very different act of creation about what God does here. And it doesn't explain the different styles of writing. Okay, kind of the grand, majestic, lofty chapter 1 versus the prosaic tone of chapter 2. And so this tone is something that other commentators suggested, and that maybe the explanation is that.
Free hot dogs.
Sorry. Good job, sweet girl. All right. Thanks.
Hot dogs is a good idea. Commentators that notice this literary difference or this stylistic difference point out that chapter 1 perhaps is a poetic entrance, kind of a beginning to this great book. So it's more lofty in literary style, and maybe it rearranges some of the events to for poetic purpose. Okay, so for the sake of kind of literary balance and whatever else. So maybe it's more lofty, more poetic, and maybe less super accurate. Whereas chapter 2 is the documentary version. Okay, kind of more prosaic, but a more grounded representation of what happened. Okay, so again, so these are two explanations that are out there. But I think, again, of course, we can't know. But I think what you suggested as either a dream sequence versus reality or two different perceptions really is the way that most of us would approach it if it were presented to us in a modern work of literature or modern film. Okay, we would simply. I say that simply because we've seen it in movies like Memento or Pulp Fiction or many other movies. It's become kind of a thing ever since, I guess, Kurosawa. So that these are parallel stories told or experienced or perceived by different participants in the story. I don't know if you remember Reservoir Dogs, okay, where you see the heist as Mr. Pink saw it, and then you see it again as Mr. Blonde saw it, etc. So there's a scholar by the name of Pamela Reese, who suggests that these two chapters are the same story, the story of creation, from the perspectives of the two participants, God and man. So the Bible tells us what happened in chapter 1, tells us what happened as God experienced it. And we even in chapter 1 hear God speaking in the first person. Okay, let's make man in our own image, for example. Okay, whereas in chapter 2, the biblical author tells us what happened as Adam experienced it. Okay, so if you now take a look at this list of differences on the screen, you can see how this lines up with the story as God experiences it versus God, as man experiences it. God knows that man is made in his own image. Man does not know this, cannot know this. God knows that what he did before Adam came into being, created all those other things. For Adam, the story of creation begins when he opens his eyes. Only then does he encounter plants and animals and Eve. Okay? God knows that God knows how he created humans out of nothing with his word. Okay? People cannot create anything out of nothing supernaturally. So man's account of creation describes God's creation in very human terms, taking X and manufacturing out of it something else. Just like we make, cement or anything we make, excuse me. In man's account, God's acts of creation are physical acts, not metaphysical acts, as they are in chapter 1. Okay. God, very clearly in chapter 1, God does not view human labor and pain and sorrow and death as punishment. Okay? All these things are, in God's understanding, they're seen as a gift that he gave us. As features, again, laboring, the pain, suffering, sorrow, and death are features of the good and proper order of things. Okay? Adam and Eve did not sin and were not punished. Man, however, in man's perception in chapter 2, man sees the harsh realities of life as a curse, some sort of a punishment from God. Okay? Also, in this respect, God knows in chapter 1 that Adam and Eve were made for one another and made for sex and procreation, okay, for prospering and multiplying, which God tells them to do in chapter 1. Okay? But in chapter 2, Adam learns only over time, with experience, that the woman is his proper mate. Okay? God knows that he created, God knows what he created, and that and that it fit what he wanted to create. That what he created is what he wanted to create, and that it was good. Whereas in Adam's account, in chapter 2, Adam finds various mistakes in God's acts of creation. And Adam is God's guide in fixing these errors. Adam is alone, so God creates, as a fix, creates the animals. Adam doesn't find a mate among the animal, so God creates Eve. Okay, but Adam is a participant in solving the problems that God miscreated or created unknowingly. And in this respect, consider also what you mentioned, all the physical descriptions in man's account in chapter 2 and 3. A lot of descriptions of the environment. Tells about the rivers and the gold and all the precious stones, etc. These are not things that God is interested in, but these are things that human beings are extremely interested in: water, wealth, etc. And if you look at the two creation stories, you'll notice that if you think of what parts of the creation story stuck with you ever since you were a kid, and even now when you read them for our meeting, you'll see that most of the things that you relate to, or that kind of spoke to you over the years as you were exposed to these stories, are elements from chapter 2, from the second creation story. Man's experience, the story of the Garden of Eden, Adam being created separately and then Eve created from his rib, the serpent, the forbidden fruit, the eviction from the garden, the curse that God curses them. Okay, so we're humans, and this human narrative speaks to us, because we also don't appreciate laboring and suffering and dying, and it's kind of captivating for us to read about the story of Adam. Adam is the leading character in chapter 2. In chapter 1 is more boring for us because there's no humans in it. It's kind of like watching a movie about the environment. It's hard for us to connect to it. Okay, so we relate much more easily to chapter 2. And I don't know if, in case you think I'm being fanciful here, kind of seeing things that aren't there, this idea of two different stories through the eyes of two different characters. You can see this technique elsewhere employed elsewhere in the Bible, elsewhere in the Torah specifically, where the Bible tells us the story not through the narrator's eyes, because the biblical narrator kind of sees everything. He's outside the story. But there are some stories that are told to us not from the perspective of the all-seeing narrator, but through the eyes of the character in the story. Okay, for example, when Jacob fights the angel, okay, we're told that it was a man, that this man came and attacked him, and he fought this man, etc. Only at the end, when Jacob discovers that it's an angel, do we discover that it's an angel. Okay, so there's a similar thing with Abraham. A similar thing with when Saul meets Samuel before he's crowned. There's another element like this where we read the story through Saul's eyes for half of the story, and then the second half of the story we're told the story by the narrator, and that kind of reveals the contrast between Saul's experience and what we can know about the story. Okay, so this author is not some sort of children's author. He clearly plays with perspective, and he does it elsewhere. And so, so it perhaps explains, can explain what's going on here. Okay, that this is a technique that this author uses elsewhere in the Torah, and perhaps this is what we're seeing here with the two stories. And in this respect, this explanation also satisfies or addresses the problem of the literary difference between the two accounts. This masterfully structured and grand and lofty literary work for God's narrative, with again all sorts of repeating patterns and motifs, versus a very prosaic list of this happened and this happened and this happened for man's narrative. Okay, so again, to the documentary hypothesis folks, this difference in styles is proof positive that this is a different author. The first author is a grand master of poetry. The second is not as skilled an author. Okay? But again, those scholars, those who work within the biblical criticism approach, won't allow the possibility that an ancient author could create two different styles of writing, two different literary or poetic styles, to convey a message, a theological or philosophical message in this case, about the nature of God and the nature of man, or about man's inability to understand God and to understand his proper role in God's world. Okay, so if I wrote this today, I mean, if not I, but a real, a respected author who won some sort of major literary award, if he wrote this today, if we didn't know about the Bible, and he wrote this kind of story, and the first chapter was this kind of lofty thing, and everything we just discussed, according to Pamela Rice's theory, literary critics would point out how clever and sophisticated the author is. Okay, that he can convey this kind of message about what God is and what man is, and the different perspectives, the earthly perspective and the grander perspective, etc. But who knows? Maybe 3,000 years from now, 4,000 years from now, literary critics will look at the same book and assume that this author that we today hail as some sort of literary genius, maybe 4,000 years from now, literary critics will look at this and say, hey, this is not the work of a single author. Clearly, we have two authors here whose works were mashed together. Okay. So in this respect, take a look, please flip to Genesis 2:4, that ends the creation story. And actually, let me go get, instead of looking at the Bible here on the screen, let me get a physical book. So just read 2:4 and compare it to Genesis 5:1-3. okay, which ends, 513 ends the story of humanity during Adam's lifetime. Okay, that's when Adam dies. Okay, I'll be right back.
Okay.
Now, again, remember that the Torah is not a book; it's a speech. It's an oration delivered to an illiterate audience. And like in a speech, when you're done with one section, you tell, because again, in a book, when you're done with the section, you can insert an extra space to let the reader know, okay, this is the end of a section. Or in academic writing, you might even have a subheading. But in a speech, you usually tell the listeners that you're closing that section of the story. Okay, so you're telling them blah, 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 all these things that happen. And then you kind of sum it up by saying, so that's what college was like for me. Okay, so you're signaling, I'm wrapping up this part of the story, moving on to my post-college career. Or, and this is how I won the presidential election. And the next section obviously will be about life in the White House. So, so when you look at these two closing sentences, what do they say about the sections that they're closing?
2:4, such as the story of heaven and earth when they were created.
Mm-hmm.
And then 5:3, when Adam had lived 130 years, he begot a son.
Wait, 5.
Or maybe 5:2. When God created man.
5:1 to 3.
Okay. This is the record of Adam's line. When God created man, he made him in his in the likeness of God, male and female, he created them. And when they were created, he blessed them and called them man.
Right. Wait, called him man?
That's what I had. I have a JPS called him man. So what is this?
Really? Mine is the Hebrew. And it says, and called his name Seth.
Really? He blessed them and called them man. What's the Hebrew?
Wait, this is verse 3.
Verse 3. Oh, when Adam had lived 130 years, he begat a son in his likeness after his image, and he named him Seth.
Okay, good. Okay. That's some editorial.
I stopped.
Okay, good. Okay, so again, the ending at 2:4. Where is it? These are the, I'm translating on the fly here. These are the chronicles of the heaven and earth as they were created, the day man created them. Okay, and then where is it? And this is the story, or the chronicles of Adam, the day God made Adam in his image, made him male and female, et cetera, et cetera. So what does it tell you? If this is indeed the kind of closing of a section, just like I said about, and this is how I did X or Y, what do these closing sentences tell you about the section that came before? The first creation story for the first, the second creation story for the second.
It's the first creation story. The framework within which everything is being talked about is heaven and earth, whereas in the second it's man.
Right. Okay. So the comparison of these two verses, the closing statements for creation story number 1, creation story number 2, reinforces the interpretation that chapter 1 was about the creation of the world as experienced by the creator of the world, somebody who understands what was happening here. This is the creation of the world. And that chapters 2, 3, and their continuation in 4 until Adam dies is the story of the creation of man as experienced and understood by man, by mankind. Okay, so so the question is what we should do then, if this is indeed the story of creation of the world, including man, as God understood it, God experienced it, and the story of creation as man understood it, then what should we, what should we do with the second creation story? Okay, in chapters 2 and 3, should we even study it seriously, or should we dismiss it as fictional and accept only the godly chapter 1 as the true account that is worthy of serious study?
It seems like the second story would give us a better understanding of the way human beings experience things, which seems to be valuable, especially with the gives you thoughts and motivations and passions in human beings that the first story doesn't get into at all.
Right, it can't, it doesn't convey the experience of, look, if it's true, if these are two different experiential accounts of what happened, then you can already sense the resentment in Adam, or Adam and Eve even, at the very start. They're experiencing all sorts of problems with what God made for them and how God treated them. From, again, not creating, creating a world in which Adam is lonely, and then creating an unfit mate for him by creating animals before God was kind of led to create Eve. And then that irrational prohibition on eating that fruit, and then evicting them and punishing them. Okay, so it kind of gives you, like as you said, this kind of understanding of the human condition when you understand what Adam went through, or what Adam and Eve went through, which we can see through God's account in chapter 1. There's no hint of it in chapter 1. So it does suggest that even if, and look, it doesn't, we can't even say that Adam's account is false or wrong, because Adam was there. He is an eyewitness to what happened to him and how he experienced creation, or the beginning of the world. But even if it is factually wrong, even if we accept that the true story is God's, and this chapter 2 is a subjective experience of Adam, it's still important because it shapes human understanding of the world, their understanding of God, their understanding of humanity, of human nature. It's just like if some sort of, like if your mother pointed out to you at your age today that some sort of formative memory from your childhood is false, it actually never happened, it's no less important. It already shaped your whole being, your psychology. Okay? So in that respect, what I'd like to do, since we already studied chapter 1 in isolation last time, and we've kind of covered the comparison and tried to explain it here. Let me get rid of the shared screen. Good. So let's now look at just chapter 2 in isolation and study it on its own terms without comparing it to the first and seeing the pitfalls between one perception and the other perception. Okay. So before we get to the climax of the story, how do you think we should the creation of Eve second, and the fact that she was created not out of earth like Adam and like other living beings, but created from a piece of Adam, and that she was created for Adam explicitly. It's often presented as as some sort of as a problem or as a hurdle to be overcome. So what should we make of it? How should we? What are the implications of this? And again, I stress that this separate creation for man and woman are there only in the second creation story. Okay, they're created together in the first creation story and in God's creation story. But since we're studying mankind's creation story now, then what does this mean? Does it mean that the woman was not part of God's plan, but just a solution to a problem, to Adam's loneliness that became evident over time? Does it mean that she's some sort of support staff rather than Adam's equal? Is she an afterthought?
I don't know.
Again, nobody knows who you are, so you can speak freely.
When I read it, and I'm just being corrupted by other ancient, like Aristophanes' account of the creation of man in Plato's Symposium comes to mind, where human beings are split into two, and this creates eros or longing. And it does seem to follow that pattern, at least a part of Adam is taken from him and then formed into Eve. And then immediately after that, there is this sense of longing that seemed to have been missing from before. But it's also very different than the Aristophanes.
Where do you see this sense of longing?
For now, there's both. Directly.
I mean, you're right.
Man in his wife. No.
Here it's 23, 323. No, 223. Sorry.
223. Okay. Then the man said, "Yeah, this one at last is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for she was taken from man." Hence, a man leaves his father.
And by the way, I'm assuming you remember the Hebrew. Man
Ish.
is Ish and Isha.
And Isha.
So we'll call her Isha because she was made from Ish, from man. Yeah.
And so the first time Ish and Isha are used to describe a human being.
Yeah, and therefore, a man will leave his mother and his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and be one flesh.
And it's very similar to the Aristophanes account in Plato's Symposium.
Right.
Like human beings want to become one again.
Yeah, to unite. So look. So first of all, we have to acknowledge it could mean everything I said. It could mean that the woman is an afterthought, and that women are less significant, or that Eve is less significant a creature than Adam is. Less the crown of creation, because she's secondary, she's a solution to a problem. But the point is that would be an inference on our part. It is not, if we infer that from the way the story is told to us in chapter 2, then again, we maybe we're shaped by medieval misogynists who said such things, or maybe we're shaped by modern feminists who kind of castigate the Bible as saying this. But the point is that we're inferring it. It might be true, but the text never says it. We are choosing to read the later creation of Eve and Eve created from Adam as less than. Okay, but that's something that we bring into the story. We're choosing to read the second as less. And if we were to use this logic, that what comes later is unplanned, then should we infer that God intended for there to be only workdays, only 6 workdays in the week, and later decided to add a Sabbath? Okay, there's no, or that God intended there to be only fish and fowl in the world, which he created on Thursday, and only later on Friday decided also to create the land animals and the humans. Okay, it doesn't necessarily follow. It could be kind of a progression in sophistication too. Okay, later, the Sabbath is not secondary in importance to Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. Okay, so creating her second, Eve second or last, doesn't mean that she wasn't planned from the start. Okay, last does not mean does not mean least. In other parts of the creation of the creation in chapter 2 or chapter 1. So if we're trying to understand why God delayed in creating Eve, let's start with why she was created. Okay, and her purpose, according to the text, what's her function?
It was not good for man to be alone, so God tried to create an Ezer.
Exactly.
Helper.
Exactly. Okay. It's to solve Adam's problem, the problem of Adam being alone. So, but why is it a problem? Who is it a problem for? When does it become a problem?
It's a good question. It seems ambiguous. It's unclear as to whether Adam is complaining or whether God sees a deficiency.
Well, look, let's look at the text instead of just kind of getting an impression. Let's look at that part.
The Lord, I think it's in 18. The Lord God said it is not good for man to be alone.
Yes, there it is. 18.
I will make him a fitting helper.
Okay. Yeah, but keep reading.
And the Lord God formed out of the earth all the wild beasts and all the birds of the sky, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever man called each living creature, that would be its name. And the man gave the names to all the cattle, to the birds of the sky, and to all the wild beasts. But for Adam, no fitting helper was found.
Right.
So the Lord God cast a deep slur.
Right. Okay. So, God knows that there's a problem already in verse 18. Okay. It's not good for man to be alone. Okay. Adam understands that there's a problem only after verse 20. Okay. He tries to find a mate, a helper among the animals, but he can't connect to anyone. Okay. So it's only when Adam sees the animals, only when he sees how different he is from the animals, is there a sense for Adam that there's a problem? I can't find a mate here. Okay, and there are major differences. Yeah, Adam speaks, they don't. That's why he gives them names. They don't give names to themselves. They don't give a name to him. They're not speakers. He rules them, but he's not like them. Okay, he's kind of like Tarzan and the apes. Okay, he's among them, but he's clearly not them. Okay, so only when he sees that that they're no match for him, that they're not real companions for him, only then could Adam comprehend how alone he was. And again, if you look at 2:23, what you read earlier, okay, and Adam says, "This one, is a bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. Call her a woman," and everything else about a man leaving his family, etc., etc. Okay. Only after he saw that the animals are not his equals, not fitting companions for him, can he appreciate that Eve is a real companion, a mate, because only Eve, in all of these things that God created, only Eve is his equal, who shares his attributes. Okay, she's a part of him. Okay. So in this respect, so when you read the kind of recognition of, when God sees that there's a problem of being alone, when Adam notices that there's a problem, and then when the problem is fixed for Adam, maybe that explains the delayed creation of Eve in this creation story. That to have a partnership with the woman, again, that kind of union that you were describing with Aristophanes, a friendship, a bonding, a marriage. In order to have that with a woman, the man needed to first understand that he has a problem. That flying solo is a crummy existence. Okay? Because again, God already knows that it's not good for man to be alone in 2:18. Okay, and Adam sees that, is frustrated by his flying solo only when he tries and cannot find a mate among the animals. Okay, so God, it's as if God sees this early, and then God guides Adam to understand this, to see that he's alone by exposing him to all the animals. Okay, God makes Adam feel or see how different he is from the animals and how alone he is. And if this is the case, then the union between the man and the woman was God's plan from the start. Just like the Sabbath was part of God's plan from the start. Okay? But to make Adam appreciate and love and want female companionship, he first had to experience real loneliness and isolation. He first had to see that he had a serious problem in life that only a woman, that only a mate could solve.
And would it be fair to say that he couldn't see that before he could see other creatures other than, I don't know if he sees God or not, but apparently, ostensibly, it was only Adam and God who existed before all the terrestrial life was created.
Yeah, but look,
and he
obviously
wasn't
God is not his mate, obviously.
Right. But he wasn't, he didn't feel that desire or longing or anything like that. It doesn't seem until after.
Well,
Okay.
and until that scene with the animals.
Right.
Okay, so
he seems to be completely content until after the animals are created.
Until the failure of the animal experiment. Yeah. So God is the one who initiates, here, I'll make you this mate, this mate, this mate. Okay. And Adam comes to see through this failure that he's not like any other living creature here. He is alone. Okay. And that explains this joy that we read in verse 23. This one is me.
Does this foreshadow a problem with Eve? Or I'm sorry, with Cain, who's born kind of alone? There's no mate for Cain.
Why do you say that there's no mate for Cain?
Just because he's born and there's no, like, Adam, God put Eve right in front of him and put him to get, like, his mate was provided by God right in front of him, whereas Cain is born, he's described as an Ish, which I think the first time Adam is described as an Ish is after he has this longing desire kind of stuff. He's described by an Ish by his mother.
Yeah.
As soon as he's born, and there's no Eve put right in front, like he has no companion. He has his parents, but I don't think that's the same.
Yeah, I don't know, because look, it's unsolved. Where does humanity come from? It's kind of left to us to assume that there's some sort of that there must be some sort of ancestral relationship in the original family. right? There's only one woman. And so either there are women, there are girls who were born, and that's how Cain and the next children kind of reproduced, or in any case, it's not told, and we're assuming that there's some sort of solution there. But but Cain was born into a society, okay, into a society of humans. He's not alone in the world, the way that Adam was in this chapter. Okay, Adam didn't have anyone to talk with, anyone to play with, anyone to touch, etc., etc. Whereas Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel, and everyone else were born into a society. They were not alone. Okay, there's not this last man on earth kind of feel the way there is for Adam.
But Adam is given, it's not just someone to talk to, but someone like a mate, which is, I think, different than someone just to talk to. And Cain is not given that same thing, or I don't know if.
Well, Cain must have been given it. Obviously, he had it. Okay, we don't know where we don't know where this woman came from. Okay, whoever Cain married, we don't know. I forget what the next children, you know, after the murder.
Seth, and then there's
Seth, and yeah. Okay, so other children were born, but there's clearly a society was formed, either in one generation or over a number of generations. But Cain obviously found a female companion in due time. Okay, but he was never alone in the world in the way that Adam was. Yeah. So if Eve was created to be Adam's savior, the point is that he first needed to experience this angst. You know, he needed to feel like he was stranded alone on a desert island, and that he needed to be saved. Okay, and that experience of being created first, and God leads him to understand, hey, you're alone. You're alone on earth. Nobody's like you. You have this angst of being lonely, okay, and single. And only then can he be led to feel loneliness, and therefore to feel this joy and relief when he meets Eve. And he recognizes immediately, this is the one. Okay. Now, how about Eve? Okay, so Eve's later creation explains this process that Adam had to go through. Okay, so if her late arrival solves the man's greatest problem, again, his solitary existence, what problem does her later arrival solve for the woman? What does it do for her?
Well, I guess she's already got Adam there, so she's not quite alone.
Right. So they don't have the same problem. His problem is being a solo artist. Okay. What's the woman's problem that is solved by being created second? It's written. It's written. Like, you don't have to speculate.
So become one flesh. They were naked, felt no shame.
You already read it.
She didn't have a father and mother, or she clings to, or he will cling to her.
Right. Yeah.
Someone will cling to her.
A man who clings to a woman. Okay, look, the fact that she was created later, and after Adam was already made aware that he's miserable, it allows the woman to have it allows her, through her late arrival, to have a man who yearns for her and appreciates her and calls her, this is the one, flesh of my flesh, bone of my bones, and who, because of this, clings to her and stays with her and leaves his father and mother to become one flesh, etc. So look, I don't need to tell you that getting a man to stay with a woman he has, or getting men to stay with the women that they impregnate, is a very big challenge for all human societies throughout history, including our own. Okay, and it's a and it's a challenge, especially for that woman who was impregnated. Okay? Now, again, if you think of prehistoric society, without a police force to protect vulnerable citizens, without social security and welfare to help poor single mothers, without social services to support children, and again, people who don't have a support family, a support structure in a family. If the man doesn't stay to help and protect and provide for her and their baby, this woman has a real problem in life, an existential problem. She cannot feed herself, she can't protect herself during all those months of pregnancy and soon after that. Okay? Because if you look at 224, that is a heck of a statement. If you think of it, what would make men abandon their parents? You know, their flesh and blood, people that they trust, they know from many years of experience that they can trust to come and help them because they've done it so many times before. Okay? What would make them leave their flesh and blood, the people that created them and fed and clothed them and gave them everything they have, and instead cleave to some woman from outside the family, a complete stranger? Okay, why would the son place a stranger first ahead of his own parents, ahead of his own family? Okay, and the answer is given here. Flesh of my flesh, bone of my bones. Okay, these are not what this text is saying, just like what you identified in Plato. The woman is not a stranger to the man. Okay, this is not the man leaving his family and clinging to some stranger that he met at a bar. Okay? They're not strangers. Okay, she is a long lost part of him. Okay, he's rediscovering her, reuniting with her. Okay? So Adam and Eve bonded not as strangers who saw, hey, I dig you, you dig me, and therefore joined together like the bull joins with a cow, or the lion with the lioness, or a rooster with a hen. Okay? Adam and Eve bonded because they recognized one another as parts of themselves. Okay? That they were reuniting two pieces that God separated, and now they were becoming whole again. Okay, becoming again, as it says here, one flesh.
Does that create a problem for the rest of marriages thereafter? Because the rest of all of everyone meet, they're not made from each other.
Yeah, so look, I think it's a metaphor. Okay, some people read the Bible as a history of human society. It's kind of like I don't know if I told you this last time. I once heard a talk in which this professor, he was a philosopher, he happened to be a religious man, and the students in the audience asked him if he thought that the Bible was true. And he said, well, it depends on what you mean by true. You know, do I think that the Bible is an astronomy book, or a biology book, or a history book? No, I don't. I think the Bible is a book about divine justice and about the moral order of the universe. And in that respect, I think it's true. Okay, so this story about the man and the woman being a part of one another, I think it conveys a moral truth or an existential truth or what it's telling its audiences is, you, men and women, are made for each other. You should cleave to each other, leave your father and mother, and cling to your wife, et cetera, et cetera. It's a message to men mostly. And for women to appreciate this, the value of this relationship, of a man who's leaving his family and sticking to her, and to understand this relationship of love as something that they all share, because this is how you, John, were created, and this is how you, Jane, were created. Okay, so even though we know that all the people on earth, except for Adam and Eve, were created not by God, but by
Had to make as strangers at one point.
yeah, but what the story is telling them is that this connection that you have is in your bones. Okay, and therefore you should kind of embrace it and go with it. I'm obviously, you can see that I'm not reading this as a history of humanity, but as a kind of a story of that tries to convey a truth about the nature of the human family, rather than a truth about how we were created. Actually, I don't even, obviously, actually, I don't know what, I don't know how the biblical audiences and the biblical author would have said so, answered the question about whether this is how biologically we were created. But I have no doubt that they would have argued that the connection between Adam and Eve is the same connection between you, John, and your wife. Okay. So the point is that in this reading, which has more textual support than the medieval notion or the feminist notion that Eve is a second-class citizen, that she's a secondary afterthought. In this reading, which again I think is more based on the text than that reading, the medieval or the misogynist or the feminist reading, her later creation and the way she was created out of the rib were not haphazard. It's not simply a solution to a problem that emerged. Okay? What God created was not a man and then a woman for him as a means to an end, or as an afterthought. God created a family. And to make a family that functions as a family, that sticks together, he created Eve when he did and how he did. Okay, to give Adam a sense of loneliness. I have a serious problem. Okay, it's not just God who notices that it's not good for man to be alone. Now man understands that it's not good for him to be alone. Now he's aching for companionship, and then God makes this woman for him. And he makes her from Adam so that Adam would see her not as a stranger, but as part of himself, just like you said in the Symposium, in Plato. Okay, so again, before we get to the climax, the sin of the Garden of Eden, just one quick thing that is often commented on by people who dismiss the Bible as silly and kind of useless for modern, reasonable people in the age of science. And that is the issue of kind of the magical elements of the creation story, of Genesis in general. Talking snakes, all the supernatural events that take place here. So the attitude that you often get, especially around us in a culture that is less appreciative, less in awe of the Bible, is that, look, if you're reading a book that features talking snakes, then this is a book that's appropriate as children's literature and should not be read seriously by serious-minded adults. Okay, there's this kind of, the reason why so many people don't read the Bible, but simply dismiss it as silly and uninteresting and unfitting for me to read, is because it's a Bible, it's a story with all sorts of supernatural fairy tale stuff like talking snakes. And so we should give it as much respect and read it as much as we adults read fairy tales, which is never. Okay. So this kind of observation, you know, this kind of mockery of the Bible as kind of children's story, this observation made today comes roughly 2,000 years after Jewish and Christian theologians first made the same observations. Okay? And these Christian and Jewish theologians noticed thousands of years ago that chapters 1 through 11, and from the beginning, from creation to the birth of Abraham. Okay, so these are the kind of the introduction to the Torah. Chapters 1 through 11 are different from the rest of the Torah and from the rest of the Bible generally. Okay, in chapters 1 through 11, people live for hundreds and hundreds of years, you know, up to 900 years. There's stories about sons of God that marry earth girls and produce giants. There's a flood that drowns the whole world. There's a tower that reaches the heavens. There's a talking snake, etc. But from Genesis 12, you know, from the point where we're introduced to the to Abraham, the biblical story takes place in a world that is very recognizable to us. People died at a normal age. There are no monsters, no talking animals or world-destroying floods, etc. Okay, now, occasionally there are miracles, okay, like Balaam's donkey that does speak. Okay, but that is clearly a miracle. It's presented as an out of the ordinary thing. Okay, the Bible clarifies that God makes the mule or donkey, whatever it is, speak. Okay, the whole value of that story is how crazy and funny and miraculous it is. By contrast, when you look at chapter 2, the snake in the Garden of Eden speaks to Eve naturally. Okay, it's not some sort of crazy element. It's not a miracle. Nobody comments on it as fantastical. Okay, not the biblical author and not Eve. And nobody feels the need to explain how the snake lost his power of speech. It's certainly not part of the punishment that God inflicts on the snake for his role in the Garden of Eden's sin. Okay? So the point is that wise people in the past, for 2,000-3,000 years, understood that these chapters in Genesis are not historical in the way that the Abraham story or the Jacob story or the Moses story or the Joshua or David stories are historical. Okay, rather the function of chapters 1 through 11 is different. Okay, so those ancient readers try to understand the function of chapters 1 through 11. Okay, is it symbolic? Is it allegorical? Is it a literary vehicle to transmit certain truths about God or the universe? Okay, so I think when, I know it's not you, like if you had this attitude, you wouldn't be here, but we're surrounded by this attitude towards towards the Bible as some sort of children's book. Again, I think that as you grow out of your teenage years, we'd all benefit by reading what these wise, serious-minded readers, how they approach the Bible and these talking snakes, etc., for 2,000 years, rather than thinking that this observation, that our observation that, hey, there are talking snakes here, is some sort of profound observation that nobody's made before. Okay, this is a known thing. It's been thought of seriously. It's been addressed and understood by people who have given this more thought than most of us have. So, thank you. I know it's not you, but it's something that I hear this all the time about silly book with talking snakes. Again, if you take a look at your book and compare, so this is we're here at the highlight of the story. If you compare God's prohibition to Adam, what God tells Adam not to do in the Garden of Eden. This is in 2:16. 2:16, yeah. And compare that to the prohibition as the snake asks Eve about it in 3:1. Okay, and then compare that to how Eve renders God's prohibition in 3:2. Okay, so what's the author trying to what's the author doing here to us readers?
It seems like Eve might have a misunderstanding of which tree she can't eat from. So every tree you can eat, but as for the tree of knowledge of good and bad, you must not eat. You shall die. And the tree, which one was in the middle?
Yeah, I'm assuming she's referring to that tree. Okay, like she doesn't name the tree. Where is it? Where's 16?
Grass or issues.
There. You'll eat from all the trees. From the tree of knowledge, good and bad, you won't eat. Okay, because the day you eat, you'll die. And she says, from the tree that's inside the garden. But I'm assuming
in the middle.
In the middle of the garden, yes. Well, in Hebrew it says inside the garden, but I'm assuming it's inside, meaning at the center of.
I was just looking at 9 when the tree was planted. That was the tree of life, not the tree of knowledge. In 2:9, and from the ground.
9. Wait. Yeah. Oh no, it says he planted every tree that looks good and fitting for consumption, and the tree of life in the garden, and the tree of knowledge, good and bad.
So there isn't. I have in my translation the tree of life in the middle of the garden.
Yeah. So it says the language is the same in verse 9 and in what Eve says. It says in the garden. Inside the garden. It says inside the garden, and Eve also says the tree that is inside the garden, God said, do not, etc.
She can eat from the tree of life, but not from the tree of knowledge. And that's just an ambiguity.
Yeah. Look, you're right to notice that, but I don't necessarily. It's clear that the snake and Eve are talking about the same tree, about the tree of knowledge, because that's the fruit that the snake gives her and she eats. So it's clear from the context that they're talking about this tree that we're all focused on. Yeah, but just if you look specifically at the prohibition, what God prohibits in 13, and how the snake presents this prohibition, and how the woman presents this prohibition. The author is doing something here. It's not the same. Okay, and so what is the author doing to us under the surface here, subconsciously? Do you see the difference between them?
One sounds, it sounds more like a command. in the translation, I'm looking at the translation, it says, you must not eat of it, for as soon as you do, you will die. And then in 3, it says, did God really say you shall not eat from it? Which more sounds like a direction, not that. One sounds like a suggestion, one sounds like a command. I don't know if that's, at least in the English translation.
Well, look, in the Hebrew, from the tree, this is 16. Sorry, 17. From the tree of knowledge, good and bad, do not eat. It says, do not eat from it, because that day, the day you eat from it, you shall die. Then
It's not like a punishment. It's just like, hey, don't eat that because it's bad for you. Do not eat from it. I mean, it's a commandment with an explanation. Okay, don't do. It's kind of like how you tell your child, don't turn on the stove, because the day you do, I will smack you. Okay, so you understand why you don't want him to do this, and you're already stipulating the punishment, severe punishment for this thing that I told you not to do. Then the snake says, tells the wife, the woman, though God said, do not eat from all the trees of the garden. Okay, so you see in 16, God says, God commanded man to say, from all the trees of the garden you shall eat, and from the tree of knowledge, good and bad, do not eat, because from the day you do, you'll die. Okay. The snake says, so I heard that God told you not to eat from any of the trees of the garden. Okay.
Okay.
So the snake is misrepresenting.
So God is very permissive. Eat from any tree with a small prohibition. Don't eat from this one tree. Whereas the serpent presents God as super restrictive when he asks Eve, so God forbade you from eating from any of the garden's trees, huh? But when Eve corrects the snake, what do you make of her rendition of God's prohibition?
It's only about the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden. God said, you shall not eat of it or touch it, lest you die. So God never said anything about touching it.
Exactly. Okay. So when Eve corrects the snake, she makes God's allowance smaller. Okay. We can eat from the trees. Whereas again, if you compare to 16, God says, eat from all the trees. Okay. She says, she says to the snake, from the fruits of the trees you can eat. Okay, not all the trees. From the fruits of the trees you can eat. And this tree, where is it? Yeah.
The tree in the middle of the garden.
Yeah. So she makes the allowance smaller from all the trees to the trees, and she makes the prohibition greater. Don't eat and don't touch this tree. That never existed. Okay, so what is the author doing here to us?
I suppose
What's
if we follow the chronology of it, like Eve wasn't around when the prohibition came down. So, and it was communicated to Adam. So Adam had to have told Eve about the prohibition because she has some knowledge of it.
right?
So God, or maybe Adam's being protective by saying, hey, don't even touch that.
Right. Yeah. Don't even get close to it. Don't even look at it. It's like with that thing with the guitars in Spinal Tap. Okay. Don't touch the guitar. Don't even look at it. Don't film it. So that's one possibility that the author is calling to our attention that Eve didn't hear this from God, but from Adam. And so maybe Adam conveyed God's instructions to Eve in a way that was less generous and more restrictive. Okay, so that might be, like you say, as an added layer of protection, because I distrust her. Or it might be, that just like God establishes rule over Adam, Adam establishes dominion, sets rules for Eve. Okay, God told us not to eat it. I'm laying rules for you. You don't even touch it. Don't touch the tree. Okay, so again, either he's more protective or more kind of kingly towards her. What's another possibility? So this would be the case if Adam gave her an incorrect rendition. Okay.
It could also be that Adam misunderstood it from God.
Yeah, no, but if Adam either purposefully or unpurposefully or deliberately or not gave her a wrong rendition of what we read with our own eyes in verse 16. But if he gave her the right, if he quoted God word for word, what would you make of, again, her answer to the snake, the snake's question and her answer?
Like coming kind of to a middle ground with the snake. The snake is being super restrictive, and she's like, well, no, it's not even that restrictive, but like her thoughts are.
Yeah. So what does that
snake
suggest?
somehow influenced her to.
What does that suggest? If she heard the correct prohibition, don't eat from that tree. Eat from all the trees, not from that tree. And she renders it, we can eat from trees, but we can't eat from this tree, and we can't even touch it. What does it suggest to you? What's going on here? What is the author? Again, so the author could be suggesting that she is some sort of subject of man, the way that man is subject to God.
She's scared of the tree.
She's
right, like she's her own fears, or she doesn't want to die.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, certainly she's not scared. We know from the next scene that she's not scared. She doesn't. I think it conveys temptation. Okay? She notices, and the snake is trying to tempt her. The snake is saying, "Oh, so you can't eat from any of the trees." He's trying to kind of trip her up, to make them sin, to make them do this thing that they're prohibited from doing. So she noticed that fruit that she's not allowed to eat, and she's been intrigued by it, and the snake makes her intrigued by it. She wants it, but she's holding herself back from reaching for it. But she wants to reach for it. Okay, so it's kind of this. So it could be, like I said, it could be the explanation that you offered first about this is what Adam told her, or it could be that Adam told her what God told him, but she's thinking about it, and so instead of Adam creating this added layer of protection, maybe it's she wants it, and therefore, no, don't even touch it. But she's clearly thinking about it. Maybe because the snake put it in her mind, maybe not. The point is that as we read on, like I'm sure you already noticed, the biblical author, really with only a handful of exception, doesn't have a narrator that tells us the character's inner thoughts. The Bible hardly ever tells us, the snake asked her this, and parentheses, Eve really struggled with temptation, or Cain's offering was rejected, and parentheses, Cain's feelings were really hurt by this, and he was angry, or he was jealous, or whatever else. Or when we read about Abraham, the author never says Abraham doubted God. Abraham doubted that God would ever be true to his word. It never says that. When we read last time, we talked about Isaac and the knife. Okay, it doesn't. The author could have just said Isaac was terrified of what he saw was going on. He feared that his father was about to kill him. Okay? the author, that is not how the biblical author writes. He conveys that to us through people's actions and their words. Okay, so we're supposed to get the inner life, turmoil, happiness, betrayal, sadness, through their actions. For example, when God tells Abraham to, sacrifice his son, all of a sudden Abraham, in complete silence, gets into action, does this and this and this, and packs and da 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 da. And we're supposed to get something about what's going on inside him. To me, it's turmoil, but or mourning, but we can talk about this later. So the point is that the Bible only tells us people's actions and their words.
Sorry, can I help you?
Sure thing.
Thanks.
Sure. So again, so this is, to me, either the author's way of conveying to you, the reader, Eve's, that Eve's temptation has been gnawing at her, and the snake is exacerbating it, or the author is telling you something about the relationship between Adam and Eve. Okay, that Adam established rules for Eve that were his rules, him taking possession over her the way that God took possession over him, or not possession, but sovereignty over her the way God did over him. Okay, so the tree is described as tree of knowledge, good and bad, or in English, good and evil. But it's clear from the story that you read here that eating the fruit of the tree of the tree of knowledge, good and bad, does not make humans choose good over bad. Clearly. Okay, and the rest of the story of humanity is a testament to this. The next story is Kane and Lemma, and the whole story of humanity is people choosing bad over good. So what does the tree do? What does this fruit, if this is the tree of knowledge, good and bad, it doesn't make people choose good, then what does it do?
I guess it would make people choose bad, but is the word for bad the same as the word for, it's not haraf, is it? So isn't there a different sense in which people act?
Let me just make sure that I'm telling you the truth. Was it 2?
It's 5,
16?
right? Before 5. Yeah, it's ra.
Tovera, yeah, good and bad. Okay, look, the word evil, I don't think exists in the word for evil in Hebrew is roa, like badness. So there's no, like in English, there's bad and there's evil. Like an evil is a force in and of itself. And in Hebrew, it's just the same word, roa and ra. Roa is the noun for ra, which is the adjective. So
when everyone's violent before the flood, did they use the word ra to describe humanity? The wickedness.
Yeah. They did bad in the eyes of God.
Okay.
Yeah. And the nature of man, or the spirit of the nature of man is evil from its youth. Yeah, what
yep, they always,
it's ra minurav. Yetzer lev ha'adam ra minurav.
Got it.
Yeah.
So I guess it would make people do bad things.
Pardon?
It would make people do bad things. But I guess, I mean, Adam and Eve don't immediately do anything like that. And Noah doesn't do that. And
Yeah, but look, but Noah is one in his generation. You know, the rest of humanity are also descendants of Adam and Eve, also made in God's image, or also beneficiaries of the fruit of the tree of knowledge.
I guess
And
so.
and they
doesn't necessarily mean you do bad things if
Right.
Noah's part of that
Yeah,
group, or
yeah,
Abimelech. Or,
right. It doesn't make you do bad
Makes
things.
it
Obviously,
possible.
it doesn't make you do good things either. Okay,
Right.
so what does it do? What is the
It says their eyes were opened. And they
like,
were like
and
gods.
it doesn't even allow the eater to know what's right and wrong, because look, God expected Adam and Eve
To do right and wrong before.
yeah, to know right and wrong even before they ate the fruit. He expected them to know that eating the fruit was wrong. The forbidden fruit was wrong. In fact, and we know that it worked because Eve did know it was wrong. You know, she had to be talked into it by the snake. Okay, so look, my dogs here can be taught, can be trained, not to know, but can be trained to do right and not wrong. And when they do the wrong thing, they know it, and they show that they know that it was wrong. Okay, so so it's by, they know what's wrong and what's right by habituation, not by some sort of moral decision making.
I guess, can we infer anything from Solomon, because he asks God for the knowledge of good and bad? Yes.
Yeah.
It's the same words.
Yeah.
So the wisdom that Solomon gets is something similar to this.
It's the same with, yeah. I mean, it sounds like we're talking about the same kind of wisdom.
Then I guess Solomon had this wisdom to rule.
Yeah.
Like after that, he had that, there was a story of the baby that was being claimed by the two women. And he could see into people to know, I'll just cut it in half. And then he could see into people's passions and motivations, and was able to be an effective ruler.
Look, I don't know if it didn't get, look, even, we'll get to this later on when we get to Moses and Pharaoh, whether even God, or when we get to Abraham, there's a serious question about whether God can see into people's hearts, let alone Solomon. Okay, but let's leave that to the side. Look, what is look, again, there's no need to speculate. You know, the book here tells us in what is it, 3:5, in the snake. Where is it?
Your eyes will be opened, and you'll be like the divine, knowing both good and bad.
Yeah. Okay. So again, but this is the snake saying. Okay, and then, okay, so the snake says you should eat it, so that you, Eve, will be like God, knowing good and bad. Okay, so he's telling that that knowing good and bad is a product of eating this this fruit. And then in 3:22, 22, God says the same thing.
Yep.
Yeah. God is now as one of us to know good and bad. Okay, so now we can trust, okay, so the snake isn't lying here. The snake and God are saying the same thing about the effects of eating from the tree. Okay, so what is it? What does it mean to know good and bad? Like what's the godlike feature that you see Adam and Eve gaining from having eaten the tree, eaten the fruit? I mean, what's, again, not a matter of speculation. It's written. Like what they eat.
It says the eyes of them were open and they perceived that they were naked.
Right. Right. Okay. So what is the difference? What happened to them? How are they different now than they were before?
They were made more aware of their I'm sorry, 1 second. I cannot help you right now, sweet girl. I'll help you in a little bit, okay? Just go on. I can't right now. Sophie, so it's like, not right now, okay? You need to do it, okay? Not until you get something else right now, okay? Thank you. Thanks.
Sure.
They're somehow aware of their sexual organs or something. They're aware of their nakedness,
Right.
and they have to cover themselves.
Right. So what does that mean? So how are they different now? What does this say about them? What are they now that they weren't before? Or how are they now that they weren't before?
I guess they feel shame now, and they feel
right. Yeah. Look, they usually what this moment is presented as Adam and Eve gaining sexual knowledge. Okay, sexual awareness. Okay, that is not in the text. Okay, we don't know that they did not have sex before this. Okay, sex is not the issue here. Okay, what they gained was shame, not sexual activity. Okay, all the animals around them were naked and had sex. Adam and Eve were naked, and we don't know if they had sex or not. But nowhere is it suggested that they didn't have sex. Okay?
Well,
it does say. Oh, go ahead.
The only inference would be made that there was no children.
Yeah, but we don't know how long it's been, either. Okay, and we don't know how old Eve is. Maybe she's not yet of age. But it does say explicitly in 2:25. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they were both of them naked, the man and his wife, and not ashamed. Okay, so we're told before they ate from the tree, they were naked and unashamed. And after they ate from the tree, immediately, okay, so they're basically like the animals that they're surrounded by. They're naked and unashamed. After they eat from the tree, they become different from all the animals around them in that they have shame and they immediately make clothes for themselves, so as not to feel shame. In 3:7, okay, they're ashamed and they make some sort of dressing for themselves. Okay, so the forbidden fruit brought humanity shame. Okay, an understanding or a knowing, don't do this, do this, they had before the tree. What they didn't have was shame. So what is shame? What does a sense of shame indicate to us about what we are as human beings? Because again, it's suggested that this is somehow a divine feature. That again, God said it himself. They are now like one of us because they have shame. So what does shame mean?
Something not being lived up to, I think. You have an expectation or a standard that you're not meeting. I think that has to do with shame.
Yeah. But
I don't know.
Yeah.
They're seeing some kind of, I guess, vulnerability would also be part of that, because there's some invulnerable thing that you're not living up to. Or maybe.
Yeah, look, I'm sure there is something about vulnerability too. But what's certain is that shame is a product of a sense of morality. Okay, there's no such thing as shame in animals who don't have a moral universe. Okay, so knowing that something is right or wrong, look, we're not ashamed. You're never ashamed of deeds that you think are good deeds. Okay, like Hitler was not ashamed of inaugurating the Holocaust. He doesn't think it was a bad thing. Okay, so you're never ashamed of deeds that you think are good. You're ashamed of deeds that you think are bad or evil or
We'd be ashamed of like
shameful.
defects in our physical appearance as well, which wouldn't necessarily have a moral.
Yeah, that too. Yeah. Yeah. Shame or embarrassment. Yeah, I guess it would be this. Actually, I'm not sure it's shame. I don't know. I really don't. It seems that it doesn't have the moral blameworthiness because it's an accident that happened to you. It's not something that you did.
Right.
You know. But the point is, look, humans disagree on what is good and what is bad. Okay, you have a moral compass that's yours. I have mine. Hitler has his. My neighbor has his. Fine. But all of us have notions of good and bad. Okay, we all have a system of this is good, this is bad, and we're ashamed when we fall short of the standard of goodness. Okay, when we do things that we think are bad, that we think are low, dirty, etc. So what the tree of knowledge, good and bad, gave them was a sense of morality, not a sense of sexuality. Okay, not sexual knowledge, but a sense of morality. And so again, it brings up the question of in what sense whether a moral sense is a godlike feature of human beings. Okay, and again, I'm not asking you for your belief. I'm asking what the biblical author tells us in his words. Okay, again, our method is to read the book like it's a book of high literature. So
if knowledge of good and bad means morality, then God says it in that royal we that he's become one of us, knowing good and bad.
Right. Okay. The snake says it for God in 3:5, and then God says himself in 22. Yes. Okay. So the biblical author is clear. Okay, that a moral sense is a godlike quality that we have. Okay, it's a godly trait, and we share it, which indicates that before they ate from the tree, okay, so if they're like God after they ate from the tree, what were they like before, morally speaking?
Not like God.
Pardon?
So they're different than God.
Yeah, but like what?
I suppose like an animal.
Exactly. Okay, they're like one of the animals up until then, and they gain a divine trait by eating from the tree. Okay, so this is the effect of the fruit of the forbidden tree. It clarified to Adam and Eve what we, their descendants, all know. Okay, all of a sudden they understand that they are not animals. Okay, although again, physically, they're more like animals than they're like God. And remember, they're created on the same day as the animals. Okay, but morally, so physically, they look like animals, they function like animals. But morally, thanks to the tree, they're more like God than like animals. Okay, and that's why Adam couldn't find a mate in one of the animals. He's not an animal. Okay, he acted as one of the animals. Up until now, he didn't know any better. He walked around naked and not ashamed. He thought that he could find a mate among one of the animals. Okay, but he never was an animal. Okay, he didn't understand it up until this point, but now, thanks to the tree of knowledge, now he understands that he is a different creature. He is not an animal, and he understands how he's different, but he has a moral sense. Okay, and what the reason I wanted to read the two creation stories separately is that I think this is the reason why we have two creation stories that are seemingly contradictory. Okay, we analyzed all those differences between the two stories, and again they're different in almost every way, and those differences are very meaningful. Fine. The two creation stories are completely different understandings of the creation of the world and of human beings. But if you examine the two stories for similarities rather than for differences, this might be the only similarity. That in both of them, in both chapter 1 and chapter 2, or 2-3, the author stresses that God and humans share certain mental or moral or spiritual features that are common only to God and man. Okay, that's, again, if you look for the similarities, you'll find very few, but this is one of them. And maybe the only one, the only meaningful one. Okay, the first creation story says that God makes man in his own image. The second story, as you pointed out at the beginning today, the second story says that we were not created in God's image, but that the snake and Eve and Adam combined forces to transform humans and make them in God's image. That like God, they now know good and bad. Okay, they've taken a moral sense that was not given to them originally. Again, in chapter 2. In chapter 1, they're created like this from the start. In chapter 2, they become this. Okay, so in chapter 1, it's by God's design. In chapter 2, it's against God's design. But the end result is the same in both stories. And the message to the reader is the same in both stories. Okay, it's telling those audiences, you might look like an animal, but you are not an animal. Okay, you have this moral side that only you and God have, and no one else. And again, chapter 1, if you remember, chapter 1 gives humans dominion over all the animals. It's just at the end of chapter 1. Forget it. It tells them, rule the animals, etc. Chapter 2 doesn't talk about ruling the animals. It doesn't give an instruction, but it has Adam giving names to the animals. Again, like Tarzan and the apes. He's not one of them. He's above them. He rules them. He's their king. And he can't.
Right after
go ahead.
Right after the flood, there's a new description of human beings and animals, and isn't?
Yeah. That's
done.
The flood. We'll go back to this because that human diet changes, human social law changes. They get a new law about murder, and a new relationship with the animals. Yeah, so that'll be a break. So again, the two stories get to this conclusion in different ways, but the conclusion is the same, and that is you, the listener, you are not an animal. Okay, so clearly the Bible is working hard here to make this point. Okay, and so why would this separation of human from animal why is it so important for the author? If you think God is the author, why does God want us to understand that we're different from animals? And if you think the author is just a wise philosopher or theologian, then why does this wise philosopher or theologian want us to understand this? Why is it so important to convey this to readers?
It raises our sights above what is just animal. It gives us a potential that
Is it countercultural? Like, is it like, what's the problem that this statement is meant to, like, why is it so important to say, no, you're not an animal. You're not an animal.
You're not just appetitive. You're not, appetites aren't your most important. There's this important way to relate to people and all your surroundings that is different than animals.
But from what you know about the ancient world or the not ancient world, is this a problem that human beings need to be told, need to be taught? Is this something that human beings don't understand and need to be made aware of?
That we're different than animals?
Yeah.
Usually, I don't think so. Like usually, or in making high culture and civilization, it would seem that there's a big emphasis on that we're distancing ourselves from animals.
Right. In making civilization, you're right. Yeah, but that is the first, look, the first task of creating a civilization is creating the separation. Look, the idea that human beings are part of the animal kingdom, that we're a type of animal, often we modern people today, we think of it as a new idea that was brought to us by Darwin 150 years ago, 170 years ago. No, wait. Yeah, 170 years ago. But in fact, it's a very old idea. It's a pre-civilization, it's a prehistoric idea. And the birth of religion, of religions, religions were born to combat this idea. Okay, what religions convey is that we are a different thing. It's exactly what you said. This is the basic building block of civilization. That we're not animals and we have different standards than do animals. Okay, and if you think of it, the notion, the reason why Darwin makes sense to a lot of us, and why Darwinian or why this idea of us being part of the animal kingdom made sense to human beings before Judaism and Christianity, or before civilization, is because it's very commonsensical. Okay, we look like animals. We have the same bodily features, the same bodily functions as animals. We procreate the same way. We're born the same way. We nurse. We care for our young the same way. We age. We get sick. We die. We go to the bathroom. All this. Any observer from the side will say, well, they're a type of monkey. They're a type of mammal. They're just like the others, biologically speaking, and anthropologically speaking, the way we behave and organize ourselves. Okay, so we don't need Darwin or modern science to tell us that we're animals. Just walk around on a farm and your eyes will tell you that we're animals. Okay, so each of us had to be taught at some point in our early childhood that we're not animals. Okay? And religion is one of the things that teach us that, contrary to what our eyes tell us, we are not animals. Okay, historically, that's what religions conveyed to human beings. Okay? And the implications of it, of this message, that you are not an animal. Don't be fooled by your eyes. You're not an animal. And the implications are, so don't behave like an animal. Okay? Don't walk around naked. Don't go to the bathroom in the open. Don't have sex in the open. Don't treat people. Okay, so don't you behave like an animal. Again, in terms of nakedness, sex, etc., etc. Don't treat people, so don't you behave like an animal, and don't treat other people like they're animals. Don't kill them at will. Don't eat them. Don't use their skin and bones as tools. Don't sacrifice them to God. Don't kill them or euthanize them when they become old and frail and unproductive, like you do with your horses or your cows or your dogs. So don't you behave like an animal. Don't treat other people like they're animals, and don't treat animals like they're humans. Don't have sex with animals. Don't treat them like they're equals to you. Don't value the lives of animals as you do the lives of human beings. We're worth more. Okay, so this distinction between us and animals is, like you said, it's the most basic building block of civilization. We're not animals, we're higher. We're better. We deserve better than to be regarded and treated as animals. And if you think of, in history or today, if you think of societies that you think are or were monstrous, by whichever standards you have, I might identify these two societies as monstrous, and you might identify others. But any society that you identify as monstrous, you'll find that what you identify as monstrous in them is that they fail to observe or to even understand this distinction between people and animals.
We fail to see humanity in humans.
Yeah. Okay, that we find it, when you look at these monster societies, we find it monstrous when societies, treat people like animals or like things. Okay, you good?
All good.
Okay. Religion emerged to make us more than a community of animals engaged in survival, but instead some sort of a civilization, what we regard as civilization, not just animals who are living and surviving together. Now, if you skip for a second to 5.3, yeah, and Adam lived, 130 years, and gave birth in his image. Gave birth to a child in his image, in his image, and called his name Seth. Okay, now this comes at an end of as part of a long genealogy of the descendants of Adam and Eve, kind of leading us towards Lemech and towards Lemech and eventually Noah. Nowhere in all of these genealogies does it say that a father begat a son in his own image, except here with Seth. Okay, so it's a very odd thing of all of a sudden in his own image. So again, assuming that the biblical author isn't haphazard, but makes literary choices on purpose, why is it inserted here?
So I suppose it would be, there was that issue with, what comes to mind is Seth is a moral being, is moral like Adam, moral like God.
Well, okay, go ahead.
Which is peculiar because Cain's not described that way, so maybe Cain's immoral. But
look, nobody is described in that way. Noah isn't described in that way. Abraham isn't described in that way. Only Seth, Adam and Seth. Okay, Adam in the image of God, and Adam and Eve. Sorry, Adam and Eve in the image of God, and then Seth.
So the image would go back to the first creation story, but we just discussed today that the likeness is compared to this with this tree of knowledge of good and bad. So the similarities.
The tree of knowledge is chapter 2.
Right.
The image of God is chapter 1.
Likeness, right. Okay. But are we saying that there's a parallel in the similarities in chapter 1 and chapter 2? They're just described differently?
Yeah, no, again, in chapter 1, God creates them in his image.
Mhm.
is in likeness and image. In chapter 2, it's against God's design, but they make themselves in God's image. Okay, but that phrase, that exact phrase, in his likeness and image, is repeated here with Seth,
Mhm.
and only with Seth, not with any of the other descendants, including Noah, etc. So why would the author insert that very loaded and important term? Because look, if this really is the message here, you're not animals, don't think it. Why is it important for the author to insert this here with Seth?
Because
Let me
Seth's line ostensibly survives.
Exactly. If you read on in this genealogy, you'll get to Noah, who is the forefather of all of us. Okay, all the rest of humanity, all the rest of Adam's line was destroyed in the flood. The only one who survived, the only part of the line that survived, is Noah's family, who is descended from Seth. Okay, so so every human being who's ever read or heard this book is a descendant of Seth. Okay, so why is it so important for the Bible to insert this bit about Seth being made in Adam's image and likeness?
Oh, it's all human beings reading the text would be reminded that they're different than animals.
Exactly. Because look, you remember when we started today, you said, well, so Adam and Eve, or that Adam and Eve felt this connection towards one another, but I and my wife weren't made, my wife wasn't made from my rib, so maybe I shouldn't. They, the audience, we, the audience, might say, okay, Adam was created in God's image. I wasn't created by God. I was created by my parents. Okay, and so the Bible clarifies, this is very odd, inserting this exact phrase all of a sudden just for Seth. Okay, so it's telling every reader that being made in God's image is not something that was limited to Adam and Eve because God made them directly, or because they themselves ate from the tree of knowledge. The Bible here tells every reader that this divine trait that human beings were either born with in chapter 1 or took for themselves in chapter 2, that it's heritable, that it's passed on to their descendants. It passed on to Seth, and through Seth, that trait, that divine trait, passes through procreation.
It's peculiar, though, that they didn't mention Cain and Abel.
Right. Well, because we don't know Cain and Abel's descendants. Okay, we know you know that you are Seth's descendant. So there is no question. So we know that it's heritable. We know that your forefather got it from Adam. Regardless of how Adam got it, it is embedded in Adam and his descendants. Okay, and if you jump to the Noah story, if you jump to 9:6, yeah.
He is in the image.
Yeah.
For in his image did God make man.
So this is that new rule that God makes for humanity after the flood, where he dictates capital punishment, the death penalty for murderers. Okay, so again here, the Bible brings up this idea of God's image when God insists on capital punishment for murderers. Okay, death penalty for murderers because God was made in the image of, man was made in the image of God.
It says Adam, so Adam was made, or the Adam was made.
Yeah. So look, Adam is a word for mankind. Yeah, especially if Adam, but it's basically the word for human being in Hebrew is either Ben Adam, son of Adam, or Ben Enosh, the son of Enosh. Okay, so it's the same thing. So again, the Bible tells us and retells us and retells us and again and again and again in these early stories in 1 through 11, in all these references to the image of God and why capital punishment, etc., that we're not animals. Again, it tells it in the first creation story, it tells it again in the second creation story, again in the genealogies with Seth, again when God gives Noah new laws with regard to a new diet and capital punishment. Okay. You're not animals. Don't let the physical similarities fool you. Don't let the fact that you and animals share some surface physical characteristics like ears and eyes and limbs and sex organs fool you. You know, that's trivial. Okay, don't be superficial. Focus on the meaningful and essential difference between you and your dog. Okay, so like if I don't know if you have pets in the house, but if you look at your dog or cat or parakeet, if if the Bible, or if I'm telling you that the similarities between you and your dog's limbs and organs and functions is superficial, then what difference between you and your dog is meaningful and essential?
Morality and
No, but just looking at your dog. Again, just in the same way that prehistoric people might look at the farm animals and say, we're the same. We all have legs and sex organs and holes through which we expel our waste, et cetera, we're the same. The biblical author is saying that's superficial. Look at your animals again and tell me the difference between you and your cow, you and your dog. What is the difference when you look at it and look at yourself? That is the meaningful difference.
Something in the mind. There.
You can't see the mind.
No, so just what you can see bodily?
Yeah. Just look at your dog and look at, like I said, the belief that we're similar, that we're the same, is very commonsensical. They really do look like us. They have hands, have legs. All the organs are very similar that we and they have. The way we eat, everything, the way we have sex, the way we give birth and die. So it really does make sense that we're animals. Okay? But the Bible is saying, the fact that you have hair and this and eyes and ears, that's superficial. That does not mean that you're similar. What that you can see is an essential difference between you and your dog.
We walk different.
Okay, but you and the monkey don't walk different.
Right. The dog doesn't look like me.
The monkey does. I mean, that's why we like monkeys, right? Because they're funny. They look like us. Take the most man-like monkey, a chimpanzee or whatever, orangutan. What is the difference? Again, if the physical similarities are the Bible is telling you, that's superficial, then what is deep in terms of you versus when you look at your dog or you look at your ape?
Seems like it would be something in the mind, or in the soul.
Yeah, you look, we all speculate. Can dogs think? Do dogs have a sense of humor? We don't know what's going on in their minds. But just
we can speak.
See, well, your parrot can speak. And they do have some, and we do think that they might have some sort of a language to communicate. They do communicate. Here, I'll show you my dog. Okay. Okay. So when you look at that thing and look at me, what's the obvious difference? Again, obvious similarities we know. Head, eyes, ears, mouth, everything else. What's the obvious difference between what you saw here and what you see here?
clothes?
He's naked, I'm clothed.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Okay. That's the important, and again, that's the transformation that happens with the tree of knowledge. That's the important, the Bible is telling you that's important. The eyes, the ears, the sex organs, the everything else, who cares? That's trivial. That's surface level similarity. The fact that you're wearing clothes and she is naked, that's a meaningful difference. That's the important difference. This is obvious. The fact that you're wearing clothes is obvious evidence that you have shame and your dog doesn't even know what shame is. Okay? That's what the dog goes to the bathroom in public, the dog has sex in public, the dog defecates in public, the dog walks around naked, doesn't even know it. Okay, so you have a moral compass, you have a conscience, and your dog does not. Okay? And that's why, look, a lion who kills another lion over a piece of meat is not a murderer. He's not a bad lion. He's a lion. But a person who kills a person over a piece of meat is a murderer and a terrible person. Okay, so I know it seems like an obvious question, but why is it? Why are you bad for acting like that murderous lion?
It's only when you recognize the humanity in the thing you're killing, right? That they're somehow different and more dignified and a moral creature as well.
Right. So look, look, it's true that you have the same, your life has the same value as the person you're killing, but the same is true of a lion. Okay, the two lions have equal value. Okay, so why is the killer lion not bad, but the killer human is bad?
I see.
We'll just finish this and like again, if a lion kills another lion for a piece of meat, and a man kills another man for a piece of meat, why is the lion not bad and the human is terrible?
Because the human that's morality, or there's. I suspect that before.
But why is it morally wrong to do this to another human being, but it's not morally wrong for a lion to do this to another lion? And it's not bad for a human to do this to a lion either. For me to kill the lion for a piece of meat.
Is it because the only thing you're killing another moral being when you're killing another human being? But I guess you would say that the lion isn't morally culpable for killing a human being,
right? Yeah. So that's a good point. So killing a moral being is not a crime if you're like, it's not a moral sin for an animal. It's only a moral sin for you. So the point is that a lion who kills over a piece of meat behaves like the lion behaved like an animal. He is an animal. But a human who does that behaved like an animal. Okay? You treated this other human being like he's an animal. You used a fellow human being for your benefit, like we use animals. And like animals use other animals. Animals eat other animals, animals use other animals for their purposes. And when you treat another human being like you treat animals, that is an offense against, again, this separation. We're not animals. And we should.
It would seem that the most common reason I think that somebody would kill another person would probably be vengeance, which is not animal-like. Like it's
well, first of all, vengeance is in support of somebody else, in protection of other human beings, but also look, people kill human beings for the same reason that animals kill other animals, but we think of them as monsters. We think of it as a terrible act. Whereas when people kill out of vengeance or out of moral outrage or out of a sense of protection of innocence, we don't think it's a bad thing. In fact, we sometimes think it's noble and worthy. So, the point is that the creation story is not some sort of fairy tale to kick off the Bible and get things rolling, to kind of introduce the characters, where they came from, so we can get to Abraham. Okay. This, that you're not an animal, is the central philosophical message that the audience is told to keep in mind as they read everything else in the Bible, and as they live their own daily lives. That people are not animals. People make their own choices and are morally responsible for their actions, and that's true for Abraham and Jacob, and for Pharaoh, and for David, and for you and me. Okay, but it's not true for your dog, or your cow, or the lion. Okay. So look, last thing, if you jump just quickly, if you jump to 3:13. Okay, this is again right after they eat the fruit that transforms them.
And the Lord God said to the woman,
Yep. Okay.
"What is this you have done?" The woman replied, "The serpent duped me, and I ate." Then the Lord God said to the serpent, "Because you did this."
Exactly. Yeah. So so the woman says, "The snake made me do it." So God says, "What did you do?" And she says, the snake made me do it. Okay. So so this is right after they were transformed into knowing good and developing a moral sense. Okay, shame. Okay, so what's the author telling us about human beings after they've eaten this fruit that gives them a sense of right and wrong? I mean, so she says, "The snake made me do it," and then where is it that he asks Adam?
Right,
right
sorry, before
in
that.
12.
Yeah, right before that.
In 12.
So first Adam says, "She made me do it," and she says, "The snake made me do it."
Exactly. Okay, so do you believe Adam and Eve when they say, "Oh, I didn't do it, she made me do it"? In fact, Adam says, "The woman that you gave me, she gave me the fruit.
So
You gave me this woman. It's not my fault. It's your fault." Okay, so look, obviously, we don't believe them. Okay, the author wants us to kind of chuckle. We know that Adam is lying. Okay, we know, like when God is there, "Where are you?" and God is hiding from him. Okay, we know he's hiding because where is it? He says, "Oh yeah." So God says to Adam, "Where are you?" And Adam says that, "I heard your voice, but I was afraid, or I was ashamed because I was naked, so I hid." Okay, it's comical, it's funny. Okay, so we know Adam says these things, and we know that Adam is hiding from God because he's got a guilty conscience. We know that he's blaming the woman that you gave me for his offense because he's got a guilty conscience and he's trying to shift the blame onto somebody else. And the same thing with the woman and the snake. Okay, so the author has them say this. The author is putting these obvious lies and these kind of funny lies in their mouths to clarify to us that Adam and Eve know that they did something wrong, that guilt, the shame, the frantic effort to get rid of this guilt and put it on someone else, that is what the tree of knowledge gave us. And that's what separates us, despite our appearance, from the animals. Okay, so I think, again, when we focus on when we look at the two stories, I think we should, the differences are interesting, but focusing on the similarities is more enlightening, and I think points us to the direction of the, points us to the function of these two stories, because what they both insist on, and what comes up again and again and again and again afterwards, repeatedly, every time the image of God or image of man or image of Adam is mentioned, is to explain why you shouldn't, why behaving like Cain is terrible, why behaving like Lemech is terrible, why behaving like Noah's generation is terrible. Okay, because we're not animals, and this failure to recognize it is monstrous. Okay? In that society and in your society. Yeah, I mean, in any society that reads this. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, do you have any questions? So next time we're going to move on to Cain and Abel, even better.
4 and 5, up to the beginning of flood. I think flood starts 6.
So next time, let's see. Yeah. So just 4.
Okay.
Yeah, because 5 is
The line leading up to Noah.
yeah, because then it's the genealogies. Yeah, we can skip that. Yeah, so just chapter 4.
Okay, so it's
Okay.
good. All right, thanks so much. And
Sure thing.
is there any way you can send me the is it a PowerPoint
That image
you
of
had
the
all those
images?
connections?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure
that was
thing.
really
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks.
and I'll send you also. Yeah, we didn't talk about the tree of life, which is a little bit of a problem. Like, what is the tree of life? And yeah, so we don't know exactly what the tree of life is, and its first mention isn't as clear. But and why doesn't God prohibit Adam and Eve from eating from the tree of life? And there's
And
also,
why can they can no longer eat from it after they eat from the tree of knowledge?
well, I mean, they can, and that's why God evicts them from the
Yeah,
garden.
right.
But and it's connected to the question of, God promised that Adam and Eve will die when they eat from the tree of knowledge, and the snake tells Eve, forget about it. Okay, so that's a problem. So in any case, I'll send you a little email about that issue. But
No, that'd be great. That'd be great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I'll send you that image and this email. Okay.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Sure thing.
Meet again Saturday at 1?
Saturday. Yeah, Saturday
Sounds good.
at 1. Yes. All right.
Sounds good. See you then.
Good
Take
night.
care.
Thanks.
Night.